Of not overreacting, I want to turn to the draft for a second. There, obviously, the Jets have a lack of quarterback now, and a lot of people are talking about an interesting name at 7. I think it's there have been some talks about the Jets trading up to go get one of Cam Ward or Shador. I don't necessarily want to focus on that because I don't think the Jets are necessarily in a position to be giving away draft capital right now. And I don't necessarily think that's how the new regime is even thinking about it. I think they want as many shots, as many swings in the draft process as possible, especially in a quarterback class where it doesn't seem like there is a clear cut generational type talent in the way that there has been in the last couple of years. But one name that's been resurfacing a lot, much to my surprise, because I don't think his tape qualifies him to be there at 7, is Jackson Dart. What are your thoughts on the Jackson Dart discourse and about him as a potential pick at 7?
So I'll obey your prompt by not walking down the Shador and Cam Ward road, but I do want to say that I'm not interested. Do not move up. Please don't move up, right? And the stuff that's coming out about Nevin Shapiro saying he's hearing about the Jets moving up, I think it's all bull. I think he's trying to get his guy from Miami in the press and have rumors. I'm not interested, right? And I'm especially not interested in Shador Sanders. I could probably talk myself into Cam Ward depending on the compensation. I'm not interested in Shador Sanders if he falls to 7, right? So that's that. As far as Jackson Dart, it was weird because Connor and Will were down at the Senior Bowl, and the first day of the Senior Bowl, all this Jackson Dart talk started exploding. And I texted them both one-on-one outside of the group chat. And I was like, hey, what is that, all this stuff about Dart true? Like, how's he look? And both of them had the same response. They had not been on Twitter much that day, so they hadn't seen everything that was happening. And they were both like, what? What do you mean? Like, no, he didn't look that good, right? They were both confused by the question. And so I am where I think I'm approaching the Dart thing already from a place of skepticism, which I'm trying to work out of myself. I want to try to get back to a neutral place with it and just try to look at the player. Um, Taking him at 7 on face value is insane. It's insane. When the season ended, he was a round 3, round 2 at best pick. And anytime a guy climbs that much when no football's being played, that makes me scared. Because then we're talking about throws at pro days and why are people's opinions changing after the game stop, right? I almost feel like you should go back to what the rankings were at the end of the season, and that should be the gold standard, and that's not what happens every year. There are movers and shakers every year. And so taking him at 7 would scare the shit out of me. Now, the counter to that is that Broncos took Bo Nix, 4 rounds before I would have took him if I was a GM last year, right? And look what happened, right? And so there's the argument of well, you just take your guy. Whenever you get the chance to take your guy, you take him. But that presumes that the Jets think that he is the guy, right? And so I get the argument on both sides. There's a little bit of recency bias towards the take your guy thing because it actually worked last year. And how many times has it not worked in history, right? It's also not worked a lot, right? But because it happened last year, people are going to be on that. Now, the one thing that I'm trying to pull myself away from is the comparisons to Zach Wilson with him, because they both wear number 2 and they both have a lot of accessories on when they wear their uniforms. And they're kind of exciting, young, kind of Gen Z kids that and that's not fair to him because there's so much anger tied up in Zach Wilson with the Jets fan base. So I'm trying to pull myself away from that a little bit. And the positive I've seen are he got hit a lot, right? He got drilled in college. And oftentimes he stood in there and he delivered even while he was getting hit. And so I see that as a positive. But also well, how does he look when he has time, right? So I'm trying to view it objectively, but I'll leave it at this, right? If they were to take him at 7, it would be a bumpy ride for me, and I presume for a lot of other Jets fans, because that's such a leap from where he was supposed to go that even if it did work out, right? In between the draft happening and the time in the NFL season where we were like, oh, this was a good pick, it might work out. It's going to be like a tough minimum of 8 months, potentially years, right? Where we're just like, oh my God, did we take this kid too high? So it's a bumpy ride pretty much no matter where you slice it. Now, if he slips back into his original draft slot, and we're talking about we made our pick early in the second round and he's still kind of hanging around there for some reason, nobody knows why, and then we're trading up from our pick in the third round to get him up back into two, fine, right? I do want to draft a quarterback. I think we should probably be drafting a quarterback every single year, but taking him at 7 would be very, very scary. And I'm not going to sit here and say that the kid's not an NFL quarterback because I don't, not smart enough to know that, right? It's a dice throw. But taking him at 7 would scare the shit out of me. How about you?
Yeah, there's a huge difference between taking a flyer on a prospect that's in a middle round with a day 2, 3 pick, and especially one that like falls into your lap. Like I can't see him getting there, but if he ends up at our late third round pick, that obviously we have a pick at towards the back of the round. We don't have our own. Like if he's there, like I agree with you. Taking a flyer on a quarterback when you don't have one is not bad process. That being said, doing it at 7 when you have so many other needs on this football team just feels like resource misallocation. And so, like, I understand how important that position is and how important it is to figure it out. Doing it with your first round pick just because you have a high first round pick does not guarantee success. We've seen that time and time again. And so, like, don't, especially with a new regime, don't force it. Would be my mantra here. Is like Jackson Dart at 7 would feel like a force to me of just we need a quarterback. He's the one that's available. This is where our first round pick is. So bam, he's the 7th overall player, as opposed to making your team the best possible team overall by getting a better overall player for your offense.
Yeah, Will and Jason McCourty talked about that on their pod over the weekend too, of like basically exactly what you just said, which is like there's filling a need and there's reaching, right? And you know are you taking this guy because nobody else is there, or are you taking this guy because you really love him? And those are two completely different things. And I think the good franchises know when to be opportunistic in situations like that, and the bad ones usually miss on it. And until further notice, I think we're a bad franchise. So
Well, speaking of filling a need and not reaching, there's been some other discourse that I saw. Like Mina Kimes had an entire segment on this on ESPN's NFL show, and there have been a lot of prominent names who've been linking this player to the Jets. The Jets need a tight end, and one of the names at 7 that has been coming up is Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Connor just reshared this article. I want to get the guy's name by Max Toscano, who runs a website called Remember the Tight Ends. And it was basically an entire, I highly recommend reading it. And I was doing it as my prep for this podcast, but it was an entire article about how perfect a fit Tyler Warren is in this offense because of, like going back to Detroit, how they were able to establish the run, a dangerous run, not just a good run. Uh, and they were able to do that by being able to keep the same looks and have the threat of a pass and still have plus run blockers on the field and be able to, have that threat of the run set up their offense. Tyler Warren is the perfect player for that. The Jets absolutely need to revamp the position. I don't think 7 is too high for him. Paul, what are your thoughts about going tight end, specifically Tyler Warren at 7?
yeah, I think this is another situation with Jets fans where PTSD clouds the player evaluation a little bit, and you want to be able to just like view the player without having trauma from past generations hanging over the top of you, right? And I think number one is taking Kyle Brady over Warren Sapp, a tight end out of Penn State that didn't do much in the NFL. I think he ended up going to the Jaguars in the expansion draft, or maybe a couple years after the expansion draft, and was an overall. I don't know if you call him a bust, but like for where he was picked, he was a bust. And you didn't get Warren Sapp, and you needed a defensive tackle, and so that's number one. Number two is, and I think Badlands has driven this narrative, is that you could have picked Bowers last year if you hadn't whiffed on offensive line so many times in the drafts leading up to that. And you couldn't because you did, right? And so there are people who are naturally going to look at Warren and say, well, he's not Bowers, right? And so why are we going to spend that high if it's not Bowers? But the reality is Bowers isn't in this draft, right? And you're picking at 7. And the same way we talked about with quarterback of like, if you like your guy, you get your guy. Now, taking a quarterback at 7 who is projected in the second or third round is a way different conversation than taking a tight end at 7 who's projected between 9 and 15, right? Like
Right.
those are two different, completely different animals. And I think tight end is a position that the Jets have struggled with for a long time, whether it be, guys like I can't remember the kid's name, Herndon, the kid out of Miami, who
Chris
like,
Herndon.
yeah, he flashed with Darnold for a little bit, and we all kind of got excited about that, and it didn't work. And Dustin Keller was really good as Sanchez's security blanket for 2 years, and then he faded into obscurity. And the Jeff Cumberlands of the world, and then we invested with Conklin and Uzama, and then we drafted one in Ruckert, and like, there's been so many swings that looked promising that haven't worked out for us in the end that like I'm not mad at like looking at Tyler Warren. I mean, number one, he's a freak athlete. So yes, he plays tight end, but he's probably that modern tight end prototype that Tony Gonzalez was probably the first, but then Gates and now Kelsey is kind of looked at as the model in that vein, right? Of like that athletic tight end who can do a little bit more than you generally ask tight ends to do. And so like you could and I think he can throw too. I think he played quarterback in high school. So like you could potentially run gadget plays with this guy. You could move him all over the field. You could try
You
different
think
things. And so
you think that'll shut up the people who want us to take a quarterback? Like,
well,
hey, Tyler Warren.
I'm definitely gonna tweet it if we take him at 7 and be like, hey, we took a quarterback. So no, I think that I am definitely open to that, right? And we'll see how the board falls out. I think Mason Graham is somebody that everybody's super high on, but you're also hearing that defensive tackle is really deep in this class, right? So maybe you can like pass on that and do it later. And, so like at the end of the day, the question was, are you open to it at 7? Yeah, I definitely am. And I think it could be a really exciting player. And I think that we should evaluate it in the vacuum of this year and not what has happened in past drafts, because I don't think that really takes us anywhere.
I totally agree. And next week we'll get a closer report on some of the prospects because Paul, you're going to the combine, right?
I am going to the combine. Myself, Dan, Will, Connor will be there. The gentleman you mentioned, Toscano, who runs that tight end website, I believe he is also on deck to be contributing to the Badlands draft guide this year,
Yeah.
by way of Connor. We will be at the combine. It is my job to make sure that we are all recording and posting as much as possible while we're out there. So I'm going to be very annoying probably to Dan and Connor and Will the entire time. And hopefully we'll get a bunch of content out to you guys while we're there. But by the time next week when you and I record, I will be there in Indy, and I'm excited to be there for the first time. I also will share the screen grab out, but I just picked up the Aaron Glenn shirts and the Badlands hoodies. I will say I have not opened the box of Aaron Glenn shirts yet, but the hoodies are absolute fire. And so I know we have a few of those left over, so get in and order those. And other than that, it was good to see you again, Jake.
Yeah, great to see you as always. It's the hoodie looks awesome, and we were talking a little bit about this off there. But first off, if you're going to be an inbine for, if you're going to be an inbine, if you're going to be an indie for the combine, make sure to see the guys, say what up, meet them out at a bar. Paul, highly recommend you got to go to either Harry and Izzy's or St. Elmo's and get the shrimp cocktail. That's like a rite of passage while you're there. Uh, Check out Kilroy's, go out to the bar. Like indie, we were saying this before we got on, but like indie for the combine is just such a fun experience. I can't recommend it enough. If you're a sicko who's listening to this podcast, make sure to make it out to the combine because it's such an interesting city where like everything is so close and like connected through the tunnels, and it just turns into the epicenter of like NFL action. And I know not all the coaches and GMs go anymore, but it's the only place in the world where like you can see a trade deal go down in a Shake Shack, or like you're walking through a restaurant and you're just like, holy, like I ran into Mike McCagnon one year at like a bar at the combine, and there is a regrettable picture of me shaking his hand and asking him not to draft Josh Allen on my Instagram page. So you never know who you're going to see and what memories you're going to create that'll come back to haunt you in 7 years. So I'm very excited that you're going for the first time, and I think you guys are going to love it and crush it.
You were right, Jake. Don't back off.
I think I was wrong about that one, unfortunately. But that handshake people are saying is the reason he got fired. So if you want to go see a historical moment, go check it out. We will be back next week with more combine talk, some prospect detail, and talking about more players that come up on the Jets Twitter in terms of the top targets for names we hear throughout the draft. So please keep listening. We will talk to you guys next week. Peace.